Welcome to Contemplify, where we seek to kindle the examined life for contemplatives in the world. I'm your host, Paul Swanson. Today, I am in conversation with Susan Murphy. Susan Murphy is an Australian Zen teacher whose passionate feeling of kinship with the natural world began during her early childhood years, living near the Great Barrier Reef, and I might butcher this name, I'm going to do my best, the Gondwanaland rainforest. She is a successful filmmaker, radio producer, and writer. She received Dharma transmission from Bolleter and Tarrant in 2001. She leads regular retreats around Australia and teaches an Australian-wide sangha that extends internationally online. She's the author of numerous books, and most recently, A Fire Runs Through All Things, Zen Koans for Facing the Climate Crisis, which holds the center of our conversation today. Susan and I talk about a childhood moment of awakening, the vast meaning of the word country in Australia and its ringing formation in her, the punchy joy of Zen Koans, and so much more. As always, you can visit contemplify.com for the show notes on this episode and learn more about Susan at zenopenCircle.org.au. Now join me in raising a glass to my guest today, Susan Murphy. Well, I always like to begin, Susan, with a very simple question of where am I finding you today? What is the context and location of your whereabouts?
Okay, well, I'm actually sitting in a Zen meditation hall, which is part of where it's on the same property as where I live. We call it Cloud Mountain. Right now, if you could see out the window, you'd see plenty of fog, mist, things like that. Volatile clouds around here. They roll across us and roll on a reasonably high edge of a valley called Kangaroo Valley, which is about 2 hours south of Sydney. Very, very lush, beautiful, volatile kind of country, volatile in the sense of a lot of kind of strong energy in it, which everybody notices when they come here. It's said to be a women's area, and it's also said to be black cockatoo dreaming here. So I don't know if that makes sense to you, but from an Indigenous Australian point of view, that's saying that there's something like an embedded quality of these wonderful black cockatoos. They're big, slow flying. They have a haunting kind of call that they make. And they have beautiful, brilliant yellow spots here and there on their blackness. So it's a very powerful sort of place to be. It's also, of course, Australia. And that's why that sense of Indigenous country. And country doesn't mean countryside. Country means the deep 60,000-year-old template of relationships that's called country with a capital C. Yeah, human, place, sharing one mind almost. And so that's what country means. So this is Yuan country, and it's becoming more and more conventional to actually say, I'm speaking here from in Yuan country in New South Wales, Australia. So both kind of references are there.
Wow. Thank you for teeing us up with that rich imagery and the history of because in your book you talk about country, and it's, as you speak about it and you talk about learning from the depth of the tradition of the Indigenous people and how it is much more layered in texture than the way that we here in the States would say country would mean like out in the country or lots of pasture land. But what I hear in that is just so much more to it that one can even feel the palpable presence of country.
Well, actually, that's a real thing to say. You do feel it coming up through your feet, in a sense. Australia is very old. the rocks on one part of Australia are the oldest surface rocks on Earth. So there's that sort of, 3.5 billion-year-old sort of sense of time here that's really direct. Comes up through your feet, especially if you're barefoot. And I grew up without wearing shoes till I was 8. It's a very good start from the point of view of feeling free.
Yes. That barefoot wisdom, there's something that you share in your book. And I just want to begin with a few questions so folks can get a sense to know who you are. But one of the things that you do share in your book is an experience you had at 7. And it was a barefoot experience on your walk to the bathroom. And it was something that it was so striking to know that these experiences from childhood where an opening occurs. I'm wondering if you might relay that story about what happened to you at 7 and what has been the unfolding impact ever since then.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's still unfolding. It's really the unfolding through my whole life. But it was the most ordinary of circumstances. I was 7 years old. I was in a pretty, how would you describe my school then in far North Queensland, as it's called? Quite remote, quite sort of conservative kind of place. Although my family was not conservative. We were anomalous in that place. But I was in a classroom. I needed to excuse myself to go to the toilet or the bathroom, as an American would say. So that was, I was given permission. I left the classroom, walking across to the girls' toilet. Now there's two ways to it. One is the conventional way along a path. The other one is a sort of path that goes round behind the block. And that was the path that everyone took. It was just more natural. It was like I think town planners call it a pathway of desire. Because it refuses where you're supposed to go, and it goes to the more natural kind of path to somewhere. And so it gets worn across grass, for example, a pathway of desire. So I could feel the sun on my shoulders. I remember this very distinctly, and I could hear the 9 times table being chanted from some classroom. And at that moment, I was just making my way halfway down that little path, almost there, avoiding the prickles, even though my feet were pretty tough. And at a certain point, without warning, everything just utterly fell away. And I can only describe the experience of being one of completely held in a vast, infinite kind of space that was, you'd call it dark, except that light was streaming from whatever I was out into that dark. After a while, I became aware of other, I'd call them light bodies, if you like, or bodies of light, that I instinctively knew that's other beings. That is some other being and another being. I don't mean special supernatural beings, just like you, me, or a dog or a cat or an ant, a being. And just that sense of, it's almost like I want to say I was not surprised, even though I was astounded. It was both at once. It was most weirdly familiar while being utterly astounding. And so I was held suspended in that. I don't know how long, in a state of utter wonder. And then I gradually, in a way, recalled myself to the fact that I did need to go to the toilet, like ordinary reality. Well, the other side of ordinary reality, most ordinary reality, came back to me, and I went on and did that, utterly filled with this hugeness, this huge, I guess you could say, sense of the dimension of being. I'd say that now. I'd also say it's something like, when I tried to think about it, it felt like being a body of light, like a star, radiating energy and light into a completely accepting, inconceivable kind of darkness all at once. So when I sort of went home with this, absolutely full of it. I thought I had a bit of an obligation to report it to my mother. I did my best. I said something like, Mum, isn't it wonderful how what we really are? And she sort of stopped chopping carrots for a moment and said, oh, yes, yes, it is so wonderful. We love each other. We have a good, our family is so loving and so on. And I just sort of had the sense I need to put this away safely deep inside myself. That it is not tradable in ordinary reality of that kind. Not yet. Something like not yet. Maybe one day I'll grow into this further. So that really was a kind of indelible. It still is indelible in me. I can feel it. It often wells up with tears. That sense of that is what we are. That is what we are. Remains indelible.
Yes, thank you for sharing that story, that indelible story. I find there's a warmth to it because it's so much was as a reader, so much was being given to you in that moment that you, as you said, the rest of your life is participating in that unfolding. And I think it helps me acknowledge some of moments in my own childhood and bearing witness as I now have two little ones, like when they come to me with their experiences, to hold them gently, because you just never know the profound drop that has just happened to them in that dimension. And I just take such heart in knowing that there's these experiences from a young age that carry us through to unknown places as we sort that out through lineage and wisdom and tradition, whatever we may find it, but that it grows along with us, kind of as a gentle reminder, tapping on our shoulder.
Yes. And it links up, of course, with other experiences that come along that open it further or in a different light or in another context, or it goes on. Yeah, it goes on unfolding. Yeah.
And I mean, to me, that's the adventure of life and, the discovery and surprises along the way. And this is something that I find in what links me and connects me to various contemplative traditions is being able to have a recognition of something that is shared in the commons. And with this podcast, we seek to kindle the examined life for contemplatives in the world. And Susan, I'm curious for you, when you hear that word contemplative, how does that word relate to you and your work, if you think it does at all?
Well, my work or my practice being a Zen meditation, Zen, I guess people say philosophy, but it's not, it doesn't concede to philosophy. It breaks philosophy open. That's a bit of a problem for the word philosophy. It's a religious practice, it's a spiritual practice, and it is deeply contemplative, as in it is the act of not knowing, but of contemplating without knowing in front of it. I can't see how you can approach, if you like, God or emptiness or the inconceivable with your own small presumed knowing in front of you, in front of it, in front of that question or that quest. So contemplation for me is the undoing of the sense of that presumed sense of self. It's an endless discovery of what self is as well, but you have to not know self in order to discover self. So contemplation is this turning around a different direction away from that narrow focus of attention, which is like a narrow light beam trying to pick out this thing, that thing, ordinary kind of grasping after an understanding. Instead of that, it's a really wide field of awareness, field of attention and of attending upon just what is arising with as little as possible of knowing, trying to grasp after it. You just keep on inclining towards not knowing. So it's like if something arises that feels like a solid grasp of something, you can just almost kindly say, not that way, not that way. You keep on adjusting away from that narrow focus to keep it as wide and radically inclusive as possible.
Mm.
And then I'd say true intimacy can have a chance to reach you, to reach through, because we are very protected. This sense of self is armory, in a sense, a lot of it. A lot of it is created by fear, by almost an organism's fear of being in danger. So a lot of thought, a lot of suppositions, presuppositions, much closer to fear than they are to trust. And there's a huge amount of trust in contemplative practice. You rely on what is happening. You concede yourself to what is happening. Keep on conceding yourself. In Australia, on road, when you come to a crossing, a road intersection, there's often a sign that says "Give way." I think it's just it means you're going to have to give way to the other stream of traffic. I think it's a beautiful kind of traffic koan. Give way, give way, give yourself away, but also open the way by giving way. Giving way, yeah. Once you start to open yourself towards koans, you find them everywhere, I have to warn you.
Well, I'm excited to dive into our book. I have one more question for you before we look into your book on koans. As a way, again, for folks to kind of get a sense of some of the formative moments in your life, this is a question I love to ask. It's somewhat abstract, and maybe this has happened to you, I don't know. If someone were going to teach a class on the formation of Susan Murphy, what would be the 3 mandatory works? They could be readings, they could be films, they could be places, but 3 mandatory works that formed you that would definitely be on that syllabus.
Oh, how interesting. Okay. There's so many possibilities. This is a
it could be just for today too. Yes.
All right. So if it's film, I have a lot of film in my background. I taught film for many years and have made films. And so in terms of film, I'd go to Tarkovsky, Russian filmmaker, and probably to, which one would I choose? Possibly Andrei Rublev, weirdly enough, which is a monumental black and white film in black and white cinematography, widescreen, and at a simple level, it's about a moment when Christian Russia is being invaded by Mongol barbarians, etc., and tearing down churches. And in the middle of all this, a very young boy becomes charged with the making of a bell, the casting of a huge bell. He claims he can do it. His father, the bell maker, has been killed. And they decide to entrust him with it, but he's only about 16. And so it's an astonishing film, really, about the unforgiving nature of human reality, and yet that there is something inarguably persistent about the life of a human being, this is getting out of control a bit. I have to slow this down. I can talk forever about this film. I think it's probably because Tarkovsky understands that time is very malleable. So there's moments in that film that are timeless and endless, close-ups, and other moments in it that are fast-moving, and there's a flow of time through the film. So he's a master of time. And that's possibly what partly draws me, because contemplative practice is about, at a certain level, becoming timeless, allowing the moment to have no time at all, touching that place where there is no time at all, escaping from tick tock time, to which we conform most of our thinking and lives. So there's that. Now, when it comes to, did you say a book or something?
It could be a book or a place. I love where you've already gone with the film. Yeah, if there's a book, a place, a person that had an oversized impact.
This is one of those terrible questions, Paul, because I could contemplate this for a long time. A place. All right, a place I'd go to is when our family first moved from far Queensland, tropical Queensland, to Sydney. There was a little bay on the edge of Sydney. Sydney is on the Pacific Ocean, of course. And this bay has in it some rocks that I got to know very well. Rocks, it's a rocky cove. And the rocks had names for us as children. We knew Big Moggy, Little Moggy, etc. They all had names. And that place just feels to me deeply familiar, deeply ingrained. I could go there anytime and I'll be back in that much earlier time of my life without any trouble whatsoever. And those rocks will be the same long after I've gone. And I've seen a photograph of people sitting on those same rocks in the 19th century, in 19th century clothes. And it's the same rocks.
Wow.
That's a dear place for me, a home place. And as for a person, who would I name? I consider so many people are my ancestors, people I don't even, I know through books. So who's the most important ancestral presence? I'm going to jump to one, and I'll jump to Paulo Freire, okay? Paulo Freire, who was the great pedagogy. He offered a pedagogy for the oppressed, or of the oppressed, because he derived his pedagogy for teaching literacy from the oppressed people. He made himself, I guess, a servant, but even subject to their inherent genius, and said, I'll learn from you how to offer you literacy. And towards the end of his life, he was asked by somebody, it was clear he was close to the end of his life, and someone asked him, what is the most important thing in the world? And he said, it is the beautiful daily struggle to be congruent. And I just found that a sort of deep gift, from that man. It leaves so many things open there. The fact that it's a struggle is part of its beauty. And the question about congruent with what, that remains an open question, even though you instinctively know what he's talking about. To be with instead of in opposition, to be moving with, to be aligned with the time and the place and the beings around us. But probably for him, it was congruent also with God, with the inconceivable. So the beautiful daily struggle, to see that as a thing of beauty is wonderful. And to understand also that becoming congruent is ongoing, that it never stops. Revealing itself. And congruent with, of course, with the earth. Terms of the earth.
That word congruency, I find so refreshing, especially out of the lips of you and Paulo Freire in that kind of expression. I'm reminded of one of my favorite poems by Jim Harrison, where he talks about, in the life properly lived, you're a river. And what I love about that poem or that line is a river happens all at once. And there's no, okay, this part of the river, sure, there's sections, but it's one river all at once. You can't split it up. And that flowing congruency, just as a living metaphor for the everyday, as I see the Rio Grande every day, and just there it is reminding me there is this congruency running all the way through. In your beautiful book, A Fire Runs Through All Things, Zen Koans for Facing the Climate Crisis, you have this wonderful metaphor about rivers that you talk about, a through line with whitewater rafting. And I thought it was a wonderful teaching metaphor from just again, your book is full of these moments of, well, we had 10 hours, we wouldn't get to all of them. But as you were talking about the congruency, that one came to mind. Do you mind elaborating on how the through line of a river is an important teaching metaphor as a way for understanding, well, I think, one of the heartbeats of your book?
Okay. That was, given the fact that we are in a very wild time in the unfolding of this human world. I don't need to explain that to anybody, I'm sure, who must be listening to this podcast. So the question is, how do we move with this? How do we navigate it? How do we lend ourselves to it without, great fear, and also with accuracy in some ways? So I once heard a whitewater rafting expert talking about classes of rivers. And what he said was, class 1 river, no problem whatsoever. You completely entrust yourself to that. You'll hardly see it moving, in fact. He also said a class 6 river, don't even go there. A class 6 river is not going to be safely navigated. So then he talked about a class 5 river, whitewater, full of extraordinary hazards and rapid decisions that need to be made. All kinds of savage rocks that can tear the boat apart or the raft apart. And he said, in a class 5 river, do not let your attention be drawn to and magnetized by the obvious ferocious hazards. You have to keep looking for the subtle through line and follow that. He said, keep your attention riveted on the through line. Only that just keeps, and it takes a wide kind of openness to keep seeing it. He also said that you need all the people in the boat. You need the eyes of all the people in that boat to be able to keep discerning that subtle through line. So it's a beautiful kind of image of how we can collaborate in not being sucked into a kind of whirlpool of fear, panic, hatred, and crazed behavior, which will sink the boat. It will draw us straight to the dangers. It will actually not just magnetize attention, it'll magnetize energy. It'll claim the energy that is needed. So that sense of a flow that can be followed, a through line that can be followed. And it won't be close to the edges. It'll tend to be, there's another sort of expression, to hold to the middle. Hold to the middle of each circumstance, not the kind of extreme edges. I think if you read that out to the extremism of the world right now, finding that middle is like finding Paulo Freire's congruence as well. It's the same sense of having that field awareness, which is highly attentive. At a certain level, it's empty. It's empty of supposition. It's utterly alert. It's very intelligent. And partly because it's not easily dazzled. It's undazzled. It's open to the beauty and the astonishment of being here, but not dazzled by it, not blinded.
Mm.
Able to keep that calm, that sort of equanimity at a certain level. That is the foundation of any kind of ability to offer compassion, to feel joy. Equanimity is at the basis of it. There's an expression in Indigenous fire stick farming, which is like that regenerative farming, use of fire, which is a cool fire, the idea of a cool fire. It's another kind of koan in a way.
Yes.
That's a fire that will never consume the canopy. It will never rise to the canopy. It is set with exquisite sort of sensitivity to what plant groupings are there, what moisture there is in the grass and the leaves, it's a very deeply felt awareness of the place before that fire is lit. And that fire will remain cool. It will never become a hot, dangerous kind of fire. Children will be able to walk on that ground soon after with their bare feet. And creatures will be able to make their way out of the fire and return for the pickings soon after. So it's regenerative, it's inclusive. I just think cool fire is a beautiful way of understanding equanimity.
Yeah.
Because there's compassion, there's fire and love in it, but it is kept on the side of what will be of help here, what will be regenerative, what will mitigate against harm, what is at the very middle of the middle here, that place of poise at the middle. And getting back to your first question, Paul, contemplative practice is a constant return to the middle, which is so open in all directions.
Well said. The middle of the middle. And I would love to have you share what a koan is, because I think for some folks it'll be a new thing, or it's been used in popular culture and can get taken in different directions. And so we've been hinting at it. I would love just to get kind of your concrete sense of how you would explain this to someone who's never kind of experienced or sat with a koan. How would you introduce somebody to what a koan is?
Okay. Well, a koan it's either a question, a direct question, or else it's a statement which does not seem to fit with as an answer to a question. So therefore, it's already interesting. It's got a sort of call in it. It's got a sense of there being something more to see here, much, much more to see. In fact, a koan is asking you to turn your understanding around completely. So I'll give you an example. One that people might have heard of is the sound of a single hand. It's often called taken as one hand clapping. It's not about clapping. It is actually the sound of a single hand. What is that sound? What sound is left out of it? What does it look like? The sound of a single hand. How do you hear it or feel it? So that's one example. Another one that maybe is easier to approach is, what is your original face that you have had since before even your parents or grandparents were born? What is your original face? So you need to find that effectively. You need to find it in the most ancient mirror of all, which is just where we are, just what this is, to find your own unmistakable. And original is looking back to beginningless, it's looking back to that which has no final definable source, an inconceivable sort of source. So there's a couple of koans, but let me give you another one, which I think is probably so foundational to my book, The Fire Runs Through All Things. And that one is a series of statements by Yun Men. This is Yun Men being one of the great Chan, sort of towering figures of Chan Buddhism. Chan, of course, is Zen. It's the Chinese way, or rather Zen is the Japanese way of saying Chan. So Yun Men, 9th, 10th century China, he said, medicine and sickness heal into each other. He then said, the whole earth is medicine. And he then said, so what is this self? What is yourself? In the light of those two astonishing statements, what is this self? Which is the fundamental human koan. What is this self? How did it get here? What the hell is it?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Koans always make me laugh.
They should. They should.
Yes. You have that punchy line about they reveal the undivided too. And I think the way that humor does that, the way that koans do that, the way that poetry does that, there's a sharing of some sort of DNA in all of those things, because
Totally.
the koan that you just shared, like when I first read that in your book, I was just like mouth agape and just like, wow. And then I would just walk around it for the rest of the day, like this just keeps tickling me.
Yeah, your mouth is agape, but you know it's true, don't you? You do know it's true.
That's it. That's exactly it. That's
So how do
exactly.
you
Every
finally
cell
get
knows
it's
it's
true?
true.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we have to laugh. It's so wonderful because it's sort of like shaking us back to what we've always known and
Yeah.
weirdly keep forgetting. Yeah.
I was so smitten by the connection you made between Zazen and koans, because I don't know that I'd ever heard, or from my own tradition, seeing that connection as Zazen as just sitting and being open, and then that prepares the ground to interact with the koan. Is that something that am I articulating that correctly, or how would you point to the relationship between the two, that there's an inter practice that could happen between the two?
Yeah, sure. Well, that first state that we talked about of allowing yourself to fall more radically open with less and less self-construction and the kind of mental soundtrack that tends to be making I statements or preference statements or suppositions in some way. After a while, you begin to notice the whole self itself, or what you call my self, is already a small supposition, like it's a small presumption, actually.
Mm.
That is a lovely discovery. So already the self is becoming more like a koan than a knowing, more like a question, a state of open question. Because no koan ever fully resolves. Like they always keep opening further, as do we in the contemplative practice. So already there's a kind of alignment there between a practice like not knowing, a practice of not knowing, and the only way a koan can be approached is through not knowing, unknowing, undoing knowings. The other part of it is that if you're going to work with a koan, like the whole earth is medicine, for example, you don't sit and think about it. You lay yourself open in the way I just described, and then you allow the koan just to sort of drop in and live inside that state. From time to time, you might touch it with your mind. But the other thing is you get up from meditation and you, or from wherever you're sitting and allowing yourself to be, you walk it into the world. You take it with you. It becomes a kind of companion that never leaves you. You fall asleep with it. You wake up with it. The whole earth is medicine. It becomes very easy to approach that koan if you take it for a walk in the bush, as we call it, in a forest
Yeah.
or in what people like to call the natural world, as though it's somewhere other. I love it when people say, I'm going out into nature. So this human body is not already utterly nature, nature
Yes.
itself. Yeah, most entirely natural. So yeah, inasmuch as a koan is a kind of tipping point in consciousness, well, so indeed is contemplative practice. It is allowing yourself to be vulnerable to that and to sit right at the edge of that tipping point in consciousness. And that's also, of course, Paul, why I see such a congruence between the kind of tipping point in geophysical terms where we are living now in climate crisis and the sense that that is the great koan facing human beings right now.
Yeah.
So to bring the mind that can be with a tipping point in consciousness seems most apposite, most valuable.
Yes. Yes. I love how you're able to so poetically and beautifully bring together practice and this reminds you. You have a word that you've created or that has been created, the praction, the way that you bring practice in the meeting of this impasse, this koan of climate crisis, and that
Mm.
you allowed the unfolding of we are part of those who have been harming our planet and are being harmed by that harm, and yet we're also trying to protect the planet from our harm. Well, we're also part of the healing of the planet, and there's so many different layers that get like needed in, and so I know of no other language beyond poetry. And I would include koans in that, like this language that is non-linear, but it creates a container that can hold the multiplicity that is needed of presence to be able to allow that interhealing.
Yes, totally agree. Many koans are in fact lines of poetry, or they are remarkably hard to tell apart from a poet, a statement. And when we say poetry, we don't mean you and I do not mean sort of trivial verse. We mean that kind of poetry that reaches right to the limits of language, right to the limits of what can be said, and dares to say it, dares to attempt to say it. Yeah. Stretching language, stretching the ligaments of language almost to snapping point, not by deforming it,
Yes.
just by agreeing to not move off, from the vital thing itself, to allow it to
Yeah.
be the unsayable, to be felt.
Yeah. And it's only in those spaces I feel like where you speak about like the deep adaptation, like there's that bending that happens, and it needs language to match that, to be able to bend and stretch that to those points so that
Absolutely.
you can see the bending that's possible. I would love for you to just touch on, deep adaptation and how you see that in relationship to what koans are inviting us into, or what the earth as a koan is inviting us into.
Right. Well, the phrase deep adaptation was coined by Jem Bendel in a remarkable piece that he circulated back in about 2018, 19. That was his own confession in a way. I've come to the limits of my possibility of calling myself a sustainability expert. This is him speaking at length, saying, I can't say it anymore because sustainability is sustaining what can't be sustained. It's conceding to a way of understanding the world that is unsustainable, and is sort of patching it up, and it's actually almost supporting it. So what he did then was he began to look really deeply into his own fear and horror at what we are facing if we dare to face it. And then he came to the sense, he actually started to delve a little into contemplative practices, actually. Well, the spiritual dimension of this extraordinary crisis. How could it not be a spiritual crisis? It is, the word existential is worn out by now. It is an existential crisis, but it looks right into the very nature of who the hell we think we are, what the hell we think we're doing here.
Yeah.
So what he began to find out is when you offer or subject people to this degree of, and himself included, and then other people in small groups, to this full dimension of what we're facing, when people are doing that together, they come out at the other end not crushed, but enlivened. They came out of it a little in love with each other because they are facing it in a loving space. And that sense of being able to reach beyond me and my fear to you are, therefore I am. We're in this utterly in a kind of accord. When you touch that accord, it starts to be a regenerative energy. So this is the turning. This is fear being turned into something close to love, really.
Yeah.
So that's probably the very deepest thing I've taken from his process of looking at deep adaptation, looking at the fact that we need to make a remarkable, actually, we need to do a remaking of this, what a human being is on this particular Earth, not Mars, not Venus, not cloud cuckoo land, but this Earth, the terms of this Earth. This remarkable, astonishing, and I can't get over the Earth. I've never been able to get over what I'm like Emily Dickinson. She said, life is so astonishing, it leaves very little time for anything else.
Yeah.
It.
Yes.
The remarkable thing is people appear not to have got over it. How did they do
Yes.
it? So anyway, so deep adaptation is really taking on the fullness. You used the word, came back to the idea that in a way it's only poetry that can reach to this. Well, it was a poet, Robert Hass, back in around 2004, I think. He just offered this almost theorem of what we are. He said, we are the only protectors. And we are what needs to be protected. And we are what it needs to be protected from. So when you have it like that, you either have a sense of the walls are closing in, there's no way out of this, or you have a sense of this is the multidimensional basis of every right action we can ever find from here on. It has to be aware of all three of those facts. We are the only protectors, the only ones who can protect or, in a sense, defend against the forces that are so destructive. We are what needs protecting and our values, and we are what it needs to be protected from. So what is it? Well, it's the wholeness of where we are, what this is, us, this planet, this, and not just us. That us is very big. It's all the creatures. It's all, and creatureliness. I don't know how to take life out of any part of this earth. It's the whole damn thing is alive.
Yes.
It's an alive reality.
Yes.
So I feel, the deep adaptation asked by that set of three propositions, in a sense, is highly creative. And, long time ago, a while back now, I was with the person I dedicate this book to, Uncle Max Harrison, a great Indigenous teacher of mine. And for 25 years, I worked with him in all sorts of contexts. I walked in country with him. I sort of sat on the earth to learn from him and with him. And the congruence between Zen and my Zen training and practice and that inflow of understanding of country, of letting country hold the conversation with me, they came together with considerable ease. Once you sort of stop listening with Western trained ears, it flows in. It flows in. So one time we were out with a group of people, very well-intentioned people, an organisation called Australians for Native Title and Reconciliation. So maybe 20 people, assorted people. We're out in country, walking in country with him, by which I mean he's teaching from the live facts of this twig or this piece of burnt wood or this little intimation of water crossing the path here, or each thing was a source of teaching. And at a certain point, he turned around and said to everybody, I don't hold with this word reconciliation. Everyone was a little aghast, what do we do? What will we do with this? And then he said, how can there be reconciliation when there's never been a relationship? How do you conciliate a non-relationship? But then he turned around, picked up a handful of earth and held it out to everybody. And he said, he said both mobs. Now that's a deeply Indigenous way of talking about the people. So the people in all situations, and he was talking there about Indigenous and native reconciliation with colonial history and so on. You know what he's talking about. I tell both mobs, reconcile with this, the handful of earth. And what a great koan, reconcile with this.
Yes.
And what would be left at the end of reconciling with this handful of earth and all the life in it, by the way, as well as what it signifies? What would be left of all the sort of brutal way human beings are with each other and with the earth?
Yeah. There'd be nothing. It'd be healing all the way to healing. And I think that's a wonderful note for us to land our conversation on. Your book, A Fire Runs Through All Things, is incredible. And you have stories and koans and quotes and poems and insights all the way through in such a beautifully crafted book that is the condition of the person who's writing this has to match what is being written. And you have done that in such a congruent way. I could not put it down. Well, I also knew I had to chew it slowly, because these are words that I think can, not to butter your bread too much, but these are words that can help me walk through my days and pass on to my children. And Susan, so I just want to say thank you for writing this book again. And we always like to close by asking our guests to keep ourselves embodied and to touching the earth. If you were going to pair our conversation on A Fire Runs Through All Things with a drink, what would be your drink of choice and why?
Paul, it would be water, rainwater.
Yes.
I cannot imagine a sweeter and more impossible to describe taste than water.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Someday I hope we can clink glasses in person.
I'd love to do that, Paul. Yeah.
So appreciate you and your work.
It's been a great delight to talk with you, and blessings on all the people on earth who care. Who care enough.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this slow-cooked episode of Contemplify. May its delights spark wonder, and may any sour patches be sweetened by their folly. Head over to contemplify.com to find the show notes for this episode, sign up for the monthly Contemplify non-required reading list, and also the weekly contemplative practice, Lo-Fi and Hushed. If you are enjoying Contemplify, rate and review it on your podcast player. The internet tells me this helps spread the contemplative cheer. The theme song for Contemplify is called Langside by Charles Enns and Darren Hovius. Fellas, thanks as always. And of course, I am looking forward to bringing you more musings and more conversations with contemplatives kindling the examined life in the world. Until then, be well.